What do you think about the links between macroeconomic policy and fragility? And sort of what's your take on how macro policy interacts with fragility?
Some of it is what we were talking about earlier in terms of aid allocation and so on. But yeah, I've been thinking a little bit more about that in the context of IMF programs in fragile states and so on, because many of these countries have their backs up against the wall in terms of macroeconomic balances. And we know that certainly the Yemen civil war started the day after they cut fuel subsidies as a part of an IMF program. Now, correlation is not causation, so there are not a lot of other things going on in Yemen. Let's be careful about that. But there's certainly something about the role of macroeconomic austerity or fiscal austerity and its fragility consequences. Now, where I'm thinking about this is on the other side, which is in post-conflict situations. The IMF, comes out with these reports, and now the IMF has a new deputy director for fragility, conflict, and violence, who's a good friend of mine. But when I look at their macro analysis of post-conflict situations, they are looking favorably upon those countries that have been able to increase taxes and reduce fiscal deficits. Because in general, that's a good thing. And these countries, right? But you'd really ask yourself the question, how do you increase taxes and reduce fiscal deficit? It's basically fiscal austerity. Now, if you're in a country where these people have been devastated from a civil war, and they're very poor, and the economy isn't growing, and everything's at a standstill, is this the highest priority? Is to reduce the fiscal deficit? Maybe you should sustain a high fiscal deficit for a few years. Again, this comes back to the venture capital idea, right? You give aid to the country and let them get off the ground, because they may still be in a fragility trap. Just because the peace agreement has been signed doesn't mean they're out of the woods.
Yeah, they can actually go right back into conflict.
They can go right back as they have done. So we have to really rethink macroeconomic policy. The sort of standard precepts of macroeconomic policy in the context of post-conflict, or in the context of fragility. I think that does require some rethinking.